Sounds good. Well, thank you so much for taking the time, Peter.
Great. Good to see you.
Yeah, well, I know that you're the creator of Peter Grandich and Company. You also are the author of Confessions of a Former Wall Street Whiz Kid. That book is available for free on your website. And I also know that you have about 5 decades, I believe, experience in the financial realm. And another interesting thing is all the major sports players. You did many Bible studies with some of the most famous sports players out there. So maybe we can touch on that at the end. But I guess I wanted to get your take on, who is Peter Grandich? How did he get involved in the financial arena to begin with?
Never intended it. In fact, I would have thought I would be living in a disco before I'd be living on Wall Street. But I was a warehouse manager. I had newly married my wife in Ireland. I had actually was only baptized as a child. I had a Jewish mom and a Catholic father. Neither one practiced their faith. But so when I met my wife to be married in Ireland, I actually went through, becoming a day-to-day Catholic. First confession, all that kind of stuff. And then my father-in-law gave us a little bit of money when we got married. The security guard where I worked was in the stock market. He got me interested. I turned a little bit of money, actually a little under $7,000 into about $100,000 trading stock options. And that was in less than 9 months back, like in 1982, which was a lot of money back then. And then I got a call from a penny stockbroker, and in less than a year, I lost it all, including the original investment. And so in the meantime, I started an investors club, was discovered by a guy that owned a brokerage firm, told me I was in the wrong business, despite everything my wife and father-in-law had to say about it, because in Ireland, a stockbroker and a bookie, there wasn't much difference in their eyes. But I came to stockbroker in 1984, couldn't cold call, so I started a newsletter. And then by 1987, I got promoted to head of investment strategy for a New York Stock Exchange member firm. And I made a forecast of a market crash. They wanted me to retract it or resign. I didn't. The famous October 19th crash came. And then the day after, I happened to say, which happened to be the Tuesday of our normal sales meeting, that the stock market would go back and make up all the losses and be at a new high within 2 years. That generated an interview from ABC's Good Morning America, and that really gave me national exposure. Fast forward that, I managed some hedge funds, a mutual fund, and in the early 1990s, by 1995, I reached what many would have said back then was the American dream, multimillionaire, big home, big car, bought 5 racehorses, 2 race cars, took up a terrible male addiction called golf. But I really was a C&E Catholic. Christmas and Easter was important. The rest of the times, I went to Mass, but I didn't go out of any burning desire. And then by the end of the millennium, I suffered a huge loss of all things in the metals market. And I suffered the first of 3 debilitating depressions. And at that time, I had met a man who subsequently become my best friend ever, who gave up his life to become a Catholic lay evangelist. Now, my Protestant friends would say saint evangelist and Catholic in the same sentence. This could be an oxymoron, but he was a full-time Catholic preacher, but he was a layperson. He wasn't clerical. And he would help turn my life around. To get to the sports part, I started with a former New York Giant football player in the year 2000, a Christian-based financial advisory company for athletes and entertainers, but mostly athletes. And a year later, I would meet the Protestant chaplain for the New York Giants and New York Yankees. And I knew God had a hand in Elijah because I was a Met and Jet fan. And here I am sitting with the Yankees and the Giants within a few weeks. And sooner than later, I'm every week doing Bible study in chapel with, professional players. And that really was the grounding to what, you asked about. Of course, my career, I would go in and out of the financial world, first as a money manager, then corporate communications. And then I would open, and expand that sports end of the business, and then have a beautiful office in of a town I always dreamed of. But then the COVID came, and then all the social and political stuff that hit Elijah into sports conflicted with my faith. and I had to make a tough decision. It was a very negative economic decision because income dropped a lot, but I couldn't continue with good faith working with athletes and teams while they practice openly things that go against our faith. And so that all came to an end at the beginning of 2021. And as you and I speak here, as you said, I've entered my 5th decade, 41st year working in and around in the financial arena. Wear my faith on my sleeve, has upside to it, but a lot of downside to it. But it's something I feel that God has put in me to be. It's always, and one of the great pleasures of meeting you is a rare chance to do and speak finance at one moment and the next moment be talking about our faith. And I do greatly appreciate that from you, Elijah.
I mean, what I find really interesting about your story is that, you were multimillionaire and then kind of just, some people might say a cafeteria Catholic. I don't know if that's the way that you'd put it, but it's so easy to go through life. And especially if you're successful, thinking that, success and prosperity all just has to do with, what I can do and all of that. And just to kind of go through the motions with respect to the faith. So what really hit you? You mentioned your struggle with depression, but can you kind of get into that more fully for our viewers? Like you were doing so well. Why did you bring faith into the mix? Why did you realize that you had to have a relationship with God?
Well, when I had the first battle with depression, I also lost a large sum of money, and I went through a humbling. And I find most conversions happen at people's bottoms, not tops. You don't normally meet this type of person. Well, I just sold my software company for $500 million. The kids are in one's in Wharton, one's in Harvard. We ski in the Winter Valley and we summer down in the Caribbean, and I found Jesus. They don't normally fit in the same sentence. Normally, a lot of people come to their faith in earnest through a difficult period of time. I guess that's because we're finally open because the hurt, whether it's physical and or mental, is so great. For me, after the first one, I still didn't let a lot of the bondage that existed completely disappear. I mean, I started this, sports company. I started Bible study. I'm sitting, Eli Manning's, I'm doing chapel. Eli Manning's sitting right in front of me. And I used to root for the Giants to drop the ball and die. So, here I am now. I'm becoming great friends. I saw 2 Super Bowls with them. But it was after the second depression, which, unlike the first one, which was because of a loss of money, the second one had none of the principles normally. There wasn't anything that hit me marriage-wise, financially, health-wise. I literally was fine one day, and the next day I didn't want to live. And it was during that time, and my dear friend who subsequently passed, and that, believe it or not, was part of the reasons why the third and most debilitating depression happened shortly after his death. He was a full-time Catholic lay evangelist, but he was everything to me. He was my counselor. He was my confessor, although obviously I went, priest to confession as well. And he knew more about me than anybody else. And he was the one of only 3 people I ever met that truly, as a human being, tried to live the Sermon on the Mount. And it used to bother me. And one of the biggest things that bothered me about it, and I've shared about this openly the last couple of years, his biggest thing to me was each and every time we would sit down, he would remind me that this problem that I had with my sister, who I hadn't spoken for years, I can't expect God to forgive me if I can't forgive others. And, and I would just say, don't start. But after his passing, and after I entered the third and worst depression, I took it upon his advice and literally sought out and put down on a piece of paper everybody I thought that I was mad at and maybe possibly mad at me, and sought reconciliation in everyone except one with my sister. And I have to say this, and I've been on this, beating this a path in my work, trying to share it as much as possible. I've never imagined that I could go from having such distaste and dislike inside me to absolutely gone. You say my sister's name now, I only have compassion and love. I have no anger or anything. And that's one of the beauties of having faith and to understand that Jesus came not to send lightning bolts, but he came for love, mercy, and forgiveness. There are still a sect in Catholic faith and Protestant that are always spending every day talking about these coming troubles and all these predictions of horror and all. But I think that's a misunderstanding of why Jesus came as a human being and what he did at the cross. And I've erred on the side that my friend who believed mercy, love, and forgiveness was the theme of Jesus's ministry is what we're called to do. Now, listen, you can't live them. The Sermon on the Mount is basically an impossible task for humans. Turn the other cheek. Okay. Take this. Oh, you took this? Take this too. I mean, there's things in there that just as a human sinful nature, we're just not going to do all the time. That's why God says a great thing about 7 times 70. And we're not limited to that. That's not the limit. In other words, you're going to be forgiven 7 times 70, but after that, no. And I would just say who's ever watching this, not only thankful that he's merciful, because if he wasn't merciful and he didn't pass on grace, none of us would make it anywhere. But to have forgiveness and to remove that as such a weight that really stops us from enjoying life to the fullest.
These are silver bars. Silver, in many languages, actually means money. You may have noticed inflation a little bit in the last few years, the prices of everything rising. Well, what it actually is the value of the dollar falling. If you're concerned about the US dollar falling even more in value, if you're concerned about the stability of the banking system, or if you're concerned about the ever-expanding US national debt, you can invest in physical precious metals. These assets have never gone to zero in 6,000 years. Simply call 419-490-5295. I'm a Miles Franklin precious metal broker. Miles Franklin has been in business for over 30 years, with no complaints ever registered. Simply give me a call and we'll discuss your needs. Yeah, I think it's always a balance between mercy and also the need for us to respond as well. So some people have the idea that, I can do whatever I want and God is merciful and I'll be saved in the end, right? And I think it's obviously a false way to think about things, but we also can't fall into despair where we lose hope, right? Because we're like, how could God forgive me for this, or how could God redeem someone like me? So it involves a personal repentance, right? And also an acceptance of God's mercy. So a change of one's life and realizing that we can't do it without God's help. And I did want to, because in your book, in your chapter about what Christianity means to you, you mentioned how it really hits you that you have to give God everything, not just a little bit. And really, it's a binary question, right? Are you going to follow God's law or are you going to follow the devil's law? So your take on that, like what hits you regarding that, and what does that mean to you to really live according to God's law all the time?
Well, the interesting thing I always like to tell people is that even if you only want to look at the Holy Bible, which obviously we view as the blueprint to life, if you just want to look at it as an historical book, know that there's more talk about things related to money and finance than there is even about what you think the ultimate targets would be, heaven or hell. And half the parables are about that. And so God knew about money, how it would be, but he also talked several different times about how tough it is, in a sense, the richer you are, how tougher it is. The famous getting through the eye through a needle for a rich man. But he points out other things about where richness and getting caught up in money. And I always like, if you don't mind, I stole this from my dear friend Bill, who was the Catholic lay evangelist. I stole a lot of his work. God rest his soul. And I miss him dearly. But he liked to tell a story, and he would always tell scripture, tying it into those times plus present time. And the great story he would always like to tell, and I use in my business, Elijah, is that, the story about the rich man. He drives up in this stretched chariot. That's how we kind of tie it in between then and now. And he gets out and says, hey, where's this guy Jesus? And they tell him where he is. They say, hey, how do I join? And Jesus says, well, if you follow the commandments. And, yeah, I got that down. Where do I sign up? So Jesus, listen, before you do that, I just want you to do one thing. What's that? I'll do it. Just tell me. And he says, I want you to go home and I want you to have a big garage sale. And I want you to give all the money to the poor and then come follow me. And the guy goes, wait a second. Oh, it's 5:00. I got a meeting. Listen, I'll get back to you. And of course, it says in Scripture, the last thing it says, he leaves sad. And what I believe that story is told for is that it's not that we all have to be Mother Teresa, that we're all to give everything we have and, not have anything. But those of us who are blessed with something extra, we're called to a higher level to be even better stewards. That's why he makes such a more important thing about the woman who just took her 2 coins than the rich that just gave the excess. And it wasn't that she gave everything, but that she was willing to do that. So we're called to have the heart of Mother Teresa, not to be all like Mother Teresa, but to have that heart. And stewardship is something that's difficult. And I'll tell you where my Catholic brethren, because I worked so much in the Protestant community through sports ministry, Protestants are much better at this than Catholics, and that's tithing. We have this problem in the Catholic Church, or Catholicism in general, where tithing is just, every time we hear the priest is doing a collection, and all, especially if he says second collection, we might fold $1 up and try to dump it in there or something. And tithing is one of the most important things we could do for the love of God. And not that he needs money. He could take all the money in a second if he wanted it all. But it's in Malachi where he's the only time God challenges us to test us, to say, he tests me. And tithing, that's what tithing is. And it's tithing not out of excess. It's tithing even when things are tough and all. And so to answer your original thing, and what changed for me is I could have a bigger home. I can afford take out a mortgage. I can get a more expensive car outside and all lies, But what I've concluded now, and this isn't how I first thought 40 years ago, but what I concluded now is there's a lot of people in the borough just down in the next town over that tonight are going to worry about, do they have enough food or do they have enough money to keep the lights on? And to take that excess to help build something for them is what I feel we're all called to do. So not only is tithing very important, but so is giving. Now, not to give in showmanship, because not to boast that way, just as we're to pray in a closet, not jump up in front of everybody and all. We're not to show off with our donations and stuff, but it is important to do those things. And tithing is not necessarily always money. I hope this hits home to somebody that watches this. Tithing could be sweat equity, going down and doing something for somebody that otherwise might have cost them or something, helping somebody repair something that could ill afford, bringing in somebody, but you have a skill to paint or know how to do electrical work or something. But helping others is very, very important. The old biblical saying that God loves a cheerful giver. He absolutely does.
Definitely. I think also, in your life, not just, during your conversion, realizing that, you have to give everything to God. You have to put it in his hands. I think one of the things, it sometimes is almost easy to think we're following certain specific rules, right? And we're thinking we're doing a good job. But then we realize that maybe some of the things that we care about the most are in conflict with the law of God. And you recognize that, right? You said during COVID, working maybe with the in the sports realm. I think so many people would find it amazing to just work alongside all these famous sports figures. Do you want to tell us maybe your struggle in that and how you made that decision? Because I think that's very honorable that you were like, it's an amazing thing to do, but I have to move away from it.
Yeah. So when I first got involved in it, what was ironic about it is I would end up meeting and becoming best of friends with the 2 athletes that I liked the most. One was a man named Joe Klecko, who recently went in the Hall of Fame from the Jets, and another was a former New York Ranger player, Nick Fatiu. And I would meet them, and they would become such friends. In fact, Joe Klecko, outside of my daughter and wife, since the day I met him 25 years ago, I've spent more time with him than any other human being, including when my friend Bill Wagner was alive. So I lived, it's like a sports fan's dream, not necessarily with household names, Michael Jordan or something, but enough people that were successful. I sat, week after week for 13 years in Bible study and chapel with New York Giant football players. I did Bible study with some of the, best known Yankees during those times and all. But what I recognized early on was that they were really more of a vehicle to help propel some of the things that I felt needed to be done. And what I was blessed with, the chaplain for the New York Giants and Yankees, who is part of a Protestant ministry, he was the most open-minded. If every Protestant like him and every Catholic like me got along, the church would be totally reunited again. We focused on the most important things, saving souls. And one of the things that I learned was that athletes can put people in rooms or opens people's eyes or ears to hear something that otherwise wouldn't happen. Like if you went down to a school tomorrow and said, oh, this great doctor is going to be in the assembly, or kids wouldn't care. So you're not, oh, who's down in the assembly? Somebody from sports. They run down there. So athletes had an opportunity to open doors, and every single member of my former advisory board, I think we had 20 members. These were all former. Some were current, still playing, and they were on our advisory board. Every one of them but one went to the mountaintop and then had a big fall at least once and came to their faith. And so they were great testimonies to our future clients on how to handle yourself, not only your finances, but also your spiritual. But what happened was, when the Colin Kaepernick started the kneeling, I publicly spoke out about it. And in the NFL, where some of our clients were, 80% or so of the players are African American, and some of them were very outspoken about that, in support of that. So I lost a few clients right away when I shared about, I will only kneel for God and country, not for, anything else. And it was more of that kind of talk I gave. And then, of course, the social media stuff that hit, and the playing of a separate national anthem, or a separate anthem that's being treated as a national anthem, and sharing these slogans and all that really contradicted my faith. My decision had to be this, Elijah. On one hand, I'm this, financial guy that's in with these folks and all, but I'm also a child of Christ and believe in what my church teaches me, and to follow it irregardless of what it might do to this arm. And that was a decision that was made. And it might have been more difficult that that same thing happened 15 years earlier, but I was already well established, and I lived so many. I could tell you sports things that happened between now to midnight. We wouldn't even cover 1/10 of them. But it still was a monetary tough decision to make, but it was the right decision. I only regret it once every couple of months when I see some guys, or be around some young guys. There's still some players that still are outspoken about their faith, even with the challenges that the social and political aspects have now integrated into the NBA and the NFL. 100% they're woke. So they're just 100% woke. Hockey is not yet, and it's one of the only sports that I still watch on a regular basis.
Well, I guess we'll see where that all goes, because it seems like I hope that the wokeness, right, has kind of hit a peak, right? And we're coming down the other side of the hill. It seems like things are toning down slightly now, especially maybe with the new administration. I guess we'll see how things go. Definitely not a perfect man there, but he seems to be wanting to get rid of a lot of these woke policies and government endorsement of woke policies. So I hope maybe the sports arena changes as well.
Well, I think it's somewhat challenging. I think it may forestall it getting worse, but I think anybody expecting a total or near reversal to 20 or 30 years ago is just not going to see that happen. It's just not going to happen in my eyes.
Well, Peter, I feel like we could, keep talking all day on these topics of the faith, finances, and sports and all that, but I did want to give our viewers maybe an option to go to your website as well, and also on Twitter they can find you. Can you tell us a bit about that?
Yeah, from the faith part, they're better off going to my website, petergrandich.com, because you can read the book for free online. But there's also several booklets I've written about money and faith and things related to it. There's this one I wrote that's called The 7 Deadly Sins to Finance, and how tie in faith into some of the mistakes that we make in investing and so forth and so on. I would encourage them to do that. Go to petergrandich.com would be the best avenue for them.
Fantastic. Peter, once again, thank you so much for your time today. It was great to speak to you.
Thank you, and God bless you.
God bless.